really nice package here, and I've really been loving the way these prowess decks have been playing out.
Yeah, I'm super impressed. I have not played against or with that particular build, and I like it a lot. I think I'll be sleeving that up soon.
Yeah, I
Uh,
don't blame you.
do we have a backup match? We have a backup match, don't we? We do. It's Nolan Zoller on Dimir Control versus Dylan Prindle on Living End. This Dimir Control deck is new to me. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is a major breakout deck from the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle Earth set. In part, it picked up the One Ring and Sauron's Ransom, which are really powerful card advantage engines for a control deck. But I also think oh, excuse me. Am I thinking of the right deck here? Yes. Um the other thing that's happened for this Dimir deck is I think the metagame has taken some favorable turns. Like Dimir is not necessarily well suited to beating unusual matchups. Think like Colossus Hammer or other Urza Saga decks, the big mana stuff like Tron, maybe unusual strategies like Mill. But if you're just playing against a lot of people playing fair and square Magic, it's hard to do better than Dimir. And I could certainly see a player who's playing well and getting the right matchups just steamrolling with this deck.
That's cool. Yeah, Sauron's Ransom is effectively a 3-mana Factor Fiction, isn't it?
Yeah. It's really powerful. I've been impressed with that one.
Nolan leads us off with Preordain. We've seen Preordain, 3 times now since I've joined the booth. That was a big addition for Modern.
Yeah, I mean that's even yet another positive change for this Dimir deck is the unbanning of Preordain.
Dylan Prindle shocked himself with a breeding pool and cycled a Street Wraith on Nolan's turn. The basic land cycle. Or a snow-covered forest. Going to second turn for Dylan. Dylan with a Spire Bluff Canal and passes over to Nolan. Nolan's definitely playing a control deck because he's done nothing except play 1 cantrip.
Yep, precisely. That these players are just setting up, getting ready for that one fight that's going to be fought over Living End. Nolan has a lot of counter spells to fight that battle. 4 Force Negation, 4 counter spell, plus a few more. And Dylan has access to Force of Negation plus Grief to try to fight, and or just playing multiple Living Ends on back-to-back turns could do the trick.
Yep. Nolan laid his 4th land and passed back to Dylan, who fetched at end step. We're going to go to Dylan's turn. That was cycling. We're cycling everything. We're just going to cycle
it. Yeah. Well, it's fair to say that Dylan's graveyard is sufficiently lethal if he's able to put it on the battlefield. So here's Grief indicating that we might see that fight engage sometime soon. But look, Nolan is well prepared. Double counterspell plus Archmage's Charm.
That's a lot of gas in Nolan's hand. Grief takes 1 counterspell, leaving Nolan with just 2 more to play.
So I think Dylan is just starting the process of fighting through these counterspells. Nolan probably gonna charm this one if I had to guess.
Could use some mana that way.
Yeah, certainly not going to let it resolve. That's the only thing that's definitely not going to happen.
I do like what Nolan's doing here. You have the you have the right to look through all those cards before they are put on the bottom of the deck.
All right, just a plain simple counter spell. Shardless Agent Resolve. Hey, that's not nothing either. You know, against a control player who wants to pass with tons of mana open every turn, attacking for 2 can unbalance them or annoy them.
There's a Bowmaster. Bowmaster from Nolan Zoller. Going to Nolan's turn. Nolan's trying to put the clock on Dylan now. Dylan, going to his 6th turn. Another grief.
All right, another grief. So this could be a big moment.
If you're Nolan, do you counter this, Reed? If you're in his seat?
Well, I guess if you feel that your mana is not a limiting factor, then you know it's slightly better to just counter the grief rather than letting it resolve and having them take your counter and then know what's in your hand. But if you thought that Dylan might be packing, you know, some mystical disputes, you might choose to just let it resolve. Um, Nolan might actually be thinking about drawing 2 cards in response, but he's probably taking a quick mental evaluation of what could be in the deck list that he might want to draw into.
So Bowmasters in response is going to throw the token, and then
This target player draws 2 cards, really?
oh my, that's unusual. So Nolan used Archmage's Charm to force Dylan to draw 2 cards just to grow the Orc Army token. That is an interesting play. Let's see how that works out for him.
Okay, so the other benefit of that was that it forced the grief to take Shuldred, which means Shuldred enters the battlefield off of the living end. So it's a nice effort from Nolan. These are some cool plays that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of in his position. I don't think it's going to be quite enough in this particular case. You know, if you look at what Dylan has put on the battlefield, that's a pretty overwhelming board presence. But you know, Nolan was able to get an opponent close to death when you know it seemed like he was totally out of the game.
Well, Dylan's got 1,000 creatures on the battlefield. Nolan takes a draw step and says, "I'm done." We're gonna go to. Are they going to a 3rd game, or are we?
Looks like that was just game 1 and they're going to sideboarding where should dramatically improve from Nolan's perspective. He's gonna get the industry standard 2 Chalice of the Void plus additional graveyard hate and permission spells.
Would you say that Nolan's overall favored in the matchup, given the power of the sideboard?
Yeah, it's a good question. My instinct is that in a matchup like this, the living end player is going to be favored to win game 1, and then the control player is favored to win any specific sideboard game. However, when you take that whole thing, you know, as a complete package, if the living end player is usually winning game 1 and then only needs to scrape out one of the 2 sideboard games, that could be a pretty favorable position for the combo player. But you know, we're gonna see. I would say things are going relatively as expected or according to plan so far, and then Nolan's gonna really hope to win this game too, where his advantage is greatest, being on the play with all those sideboard cards coming into the deck.
Yeah. What is Dylan bringing in? Do you know?
So living end is usually not that happy to go to sideboarding because what your sideboard does for you is it lets you bring in answers to what you expect your opponent to sideboard in on their side. So in other words, you know, Force of Vigor, Foundation Breaker type of stuff for opposing chalices. Mystical Dispute is definitely going to be good. That's one that that Dylan's actually happy to bring in against the Dimir deck. But yeah, I think it's going to be pretty minimal changes because Living End can't afford to sideboard a whole ton of cards and still have their combo be potent enough.
Sure. So we're on turn 2 now. Nolan had passed, but flashed into Bowmasters at the end of Dylan's turn. Dylan had cycled a creature for a land. And now we're going to Dylan's second turn.
Yeah, so notably, that's Nolan actually main phasing the Bowmasters, and the reason you would do that is you know the Living End player is going to spend their first few turns cycling. That's the only thing they can do. They can't cast any meaningful spell before turn 3. So if you can just put the Bowmasters out there at the first safe opportunity, that's actually going to put a significant tax on them in terms of the cost they pay when they do cycle those cards.
And there's that sideboard card you had mentioned, Chalice of the Void. Nolan tries to deploy it for 0, succeeds, but Dylan bounces it with Brazen Borrower.
Yeah, super interesting because what this means is Dylan is kind of committing himself to doing the Living End thing now because you know the Chalice is going to come back down immediately. But I mean, what he hasn't done is stacked his graveyard with a lot of cards. Like Nolan could just say okay, and all he has to answer is a 5/7 Generous Ent. But he says even that is worth countering. So Mystical Dispute meets Living End, Chalice comes back down, and Dylan I think is in pretty rough shape.
Dylan, cycling yet another creature. Look, fetches up a snow-covered forest. We've got Shardless Agent staring down, Bowmaster and an Orc army, a very small Orc army. Dylan's going to deploy. That's Foundation Breaker.
Yeah, so that's great. That's exactly what Dylan was hoping for. Clean answer to the Chalice while he continues to set up his graveyard.
Back to Nolan, who's a little light on lands. Gonna cycle Lorien Revealed. And grab Watery Grave? Watery Grave. Is it weird to you, Reed, that some of the most powerful cards from the Lord of the Rings set are like Lorien Revealed and Delighted Halfling?
It is unexpected, yeah. I mean, for as much as the One Ring has done to the format, Lorien Revealed has had a equally large, though more subtle footprint.
Nolan getting frisky with the Bowmaster, pokes Dylan down to 11 life.
All right, here's a big moment. If this Living End is to resolve, it will not only give Dylan a powerful board presence, it will also wrath away all these creatures, including the Murktide Regent. Oh, Force of Negation battles back, but Dylan has Mystical Dispute, and that's going to put him dramatically in the driver's seat here.
Indeed.
So if you talk about resiliency for a combo deck, Dylan was able to fight through Chalice of the Void and multiple counter spells in this game to fight to this position. The One Ring keeps Nolan in it because you get the full turn of reprieve, and then if you're able to, you know, maybe find Damnation or another copy of the One Ring, then you can keep playing.
Dylan ticks up the One Ring, probably looking for some more lands. Replaces it with a new The One Ring. That is a flavor fail. But we're going to fetch with a Polluted Delta. We're just doing Invisible Fogs until Nolan can hopefully draw out of this. Another
Yeah, so the
Lorien.
big question for me is did Nolan choose to bring Damnation into the deck? At face value, that would be a rather poor card against Living End. But if you identify this as a pattern that comes up a lot, where you're buying time with the One Ring and trying to find a way to get out of it, then maybe an experienced Dimir player could make the judgment call that it's worthwhile.
He's playing like he knows what he's doing, so I'm hoping he did bring it in to make it a little bit more of a match here. But Dylan's gonna just pass the turn, given that there's a One Ring trigger that was floating around. Nolan's gonna draw 2 off of the One Ring and drop to 15 life. Or sorry, still at 17. He drops on his upkeep. Nolan now with a nearly full grip.
So that's pretty cool. That's Minamo's School at the Water's Edge, untapping the One Ring. I really like that element of these control decks with the One Ring.
Well, there's a lot of these like subtle interactions in Modern now. I like it. I like it a lot. Bowmasters.
Okay, well, this is not necessarily good news if you're a Nolan fan. Is he's now at the stage where he is trying to fight these creatures on, by blocking them, which is a very tough way to do it against this overwhelming board.
He's doing it the hard way, like Frodo had to.
Yeah.
Dylan went in with his army of things. Generous Sense are 5/7s. Shardless Agent's really small. Curator of Mysteries is 4/4.
So an interesting block there. Nolan put a 2/2 Orc army in front of the 5/7 Generous Ent and a 1/1 Bowmasters in front of a 2/2 creature. So basically, he had the opportunity to kill a 2/2 and decided not to, uh, or just didn't care to, whatever way you want to phrase that. So for me, that indicates that he is probably just on damnation or bust, rather than trying to actually piecemeal answers to all of these creatures individually.
Dylan deep in the tank. He's at 10 life thanks to the One Ring's upkeep trigger. Deploys a basic island. I didn't see a damnation in his hand, and he is thinking hard about what he needs to do. He's got a lot of creatures to solve here.
Draw 5. I mean, that's achievement unlocked, even if he doesn't win this game.
How much? He knows what he's doing. Dylan's played this matchup before. Now that One Ring is scary, but Dylan is back down to 0.
Yeah, boy. So now we enter the burden counter stage of the game, where Nolan is no longer threatened by creatures, but he has to deal with his own One Ring before 2 turns pass.
That's an interesting dynamic. Does his deck have a main deck way, or post sideboard way even, of like bouncing that ring?
So your most common answer is going to be the Legend Rule with an extra copy of the One Ring. He has 1 Otawara, and at a quick glance, that's it.
Oh my.
Not a whole lot in the way. Sorry. Children of the Apocalypse is yet another way that he could do it, which doesn't answer the One Ring, but it lets you sort of outpace the burden counters with the life gain.
Sure. Oh, that's good. And we're 2 rings in, so hopefully he can draw another ring. Here's another Shardless Agent from Dylan looking for Living End.
Yeah, so interesting spot here, because Dylan can put a bunch of creatures onto the battlefield, but Nolan pretty much is going to be looking to cast another One Ring this turn anyway. So it's unclear what, if any, value these creatures are going to provide in the short term. I mean, Nolan may choose to counter this anyway. Dylan might have some enters the battlefield triggers like Grief that he's interested in getting access to. Yeah, I think that was a force of negation.
Nolan at 2 life? 2 life. There's Sheldred.
Oh boy.
Oh
Gain
man.
12. How's that sound?
The combo. The wombo combo. So, who do you have winning this game, Reed?
At 2 life, I thought it was a toss up, but after the gain 12, I'm looking at the player who has just gained 12 life and drawn 7 extra cards.
Mm. It's a excellent. Yes, I agree with your take there. We're in the discarding counterspells phase for Nolan.
This was a cool game because you normally would think of the Dimir deck winning by either stopping Living End from ever resolving, or like maybe getting some graveyard hate in the form of Nile Spellbomb, Chalice the Void, whatever it might be. But that was just Living End resolving for an overwhelming board presence, and Nolan actually beating that by chaining together 1 rings, 1 turn of blocking, and then Damnation. That was pretty cool to watch.
It was. I enjoyed that game quite a bit. I'm hoping this third game will be just as good, if not better. Do you think anything changes with the Living End player on the play?
Uh, I think this matchup is like paced out enough that the players are not going to change anything too dramatically based on play in the draw. I think this is a matchup where it's kind of as simple as like which of my cards are better and worse in the matchup, rather than looking for the specific patterns of the early turns. Um, but I do think that Dylan just getting a couple extra turns to cycle cards before Bowmasters and counterspells start coming online, that could be meaningful. And I wonder if the players will change their approach to the game after having seen how game 2 played out.
Dylan's led off with a bevy of cyclers. Nolan with just a pair of lands in play. One of those is Manamo. We saw that doing some cool stuff last game. Dylan deploys.
Oh no, that's Nolan missing a land drop. Had to use Lorien. Sorry, what happened to the Lorien revealed got griefed on turn 1? Is that what happened? So I see
Yeah.
a Lorien revealed in the graveyard with no island anywhere to be found.
Dylan, seeing that opponent was relying on the island cycler, chose to grab it. Nolan fetches up a watery grave. And passes back. Still no third land from Nolan. Dylan's fourth turn deploys a land and passes. Where are your lands, Dylan? There's one. Polluted Delta.
And missing land drops is exactly where the control player does not want to be, because from no one's perspective, the opponent has a combo that threatens to win the game basically at any moment, can be played at instant speed off of Violent Outburst. So what that means is that you have to hold up counterspell mana all the time. That's really hard to do when you only have 2 lands on the battlefield.
Well, Nolan's been able to draw out of this eventually. Up to 4 lands now. Dylan not able to capitalize on those early missteps.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how Dylan's going to approach this game, because at a certain point, you have enough lands in play. The game has gone long enough where you could just go like, "Hey, I'm going to start casting these Curators of Mystery and Architects of Will."
Those Street Race have Swamp Walk, Reed.
Indeed, they do.
They can't be blocked. Let's see, Dylan. What do we cycle there? We're cycling something. Grabbing a Stomping Grounds. I was actually, before you mentioned that, I was going to ask you if you would have just cast the Curator of Mysteries to be a 4/4.
Yeah, so it's really tricky. I mean, Dylan should just basically take a beat and think about what his overall plan is for winning the game. But one tactic that I would be looking for is overloading Nolan's mana. Like you have to put your opponent on having a whole lot of counter spells in hand, but their limiting factor is these missed land drops, this the total amount of mana. So if you can make a play like, well, end of turn violent outburst, make you counter the living end, and then untap and play a spell or two on your own turn, that's a way that you can kind of find some cracks in the armor and actually make something happen. Alternatively, I mean, you could just start casting creatures and play threat turn after turn after turn after turn until Nolan eventually runs out of counter spells. But that's we're not sure how well that will prove how well that will wind up working.
Probably not great. Dylan cycles for a snow-covered forest. Dylan's at 8 life. Nolan's at 14. Nolan with the board presence right now. Bowmasters and a 1/1 Orcish army. Dylan is not really drawing much gas. He had exiled that living end on turn 1 to a grief. He has 2 more, if I'm not mistaken. Correct? Somewhere in the deck list.
So that's a common configuration for living end players is to play only 3. I do see that Dylan has access to the full 4
Oh,
if he's chosen to not sideboard any out.
great. Shardless Agent into Living End off of Cascade triggers met with Ice Age Counterspell.
Oh, I love that counter spell, by the way. That's just so
It's
much nostalgia there.
It's the best
That's
counter.
the one counter spell where I'm actually happy to have my spell countered by it. I'm like, you know what? You got me. That's just a fun experience.
1994 coming at you. Foundation Breaker was hard cast. For Dylan. So now it's Shardless Agent, Foundation Breaker, staring down Bowmaster and Orcish Army.
One thing I've noticed in watching these games is the living end life total just drops really quickly. I mean, not even from anything that the Dimir player is doing, just from street wraiths and fetch lands and shock lands. It's points of chip damage plus bowmasters and Sholdred. You know, that's a real plan.
If only there were a 3-mana Death Shadow read.
If only.
Then Living End could have a backup plan. Dylan setting up for something. Big play. Needs to be a big play. Another Foundation Breaker.
That's a decidedly not big play. That's like a medium play.
It's on the lower end of medium even. Let's let's be honest with it. The Archmage's Charm and end of turn. Nolan's going to try to dig himself out of this land hole that he's still in.
So, by the way, Brad, I was wondering where those Sauron's ransoms were that we had talked about and hyped up. But actually, it seems that Nolan has chosen to play Archmage's Charm instead. Or, you know, some you have to make some cuts to make room for the additional 4 preordains. But no Sauron's ransoms. I was wondering if we were going to see like a ring bearer, a 1/1 ring bearer getting his chip damage.
That would be fun. That's an interesting choice, but maybe he decided preordains were enough card selection that he didn't need anymore. Nolan with a full grip passes over Dylan Prindle, who's got 2 3/3s and a 2/2, staring at a big old Murktide Regent. Murktide Regent's a 2-turn clock right now.
Yep. That's a big hit. So I see Nolan, passing with the Bowmasters to win the game at instant speed, and that is Dimir Control winning both sideboard games. That was a really fun match to watch because we got to see kind of everything that matchup can deliver.
Yeah, it was fun. The second game in particular was an absolute blast to witness. activating the ring for 5 and then 6 on the same turn.
Oh,
with a
the
Northern card.
Manamo. The Manamo was the unsung hero of that matchup for sure. I mean, how many extra cards did that represent? Like 9?
Yeah, an incredible amount of extra cards. Well, anyway, good luck to Dylan there. He's going to advance within the tournament. We just finished round 5. Um, what are your thoughts on the tournament so far today, Reed? Seen anything super cool?
Yeah, I've really had a great time. We got to see a lot of different decks doing their thing. A couple that I would have definitely predicted going in, like Teamer Rhinos was really thriving in the early rounds of the tournament, and then a few that are unexpected that weren't really represented in at the Pro Tour a few weeks ago. The one that really jumps to my mind is it Prowess. We saw win twice in the hands of two different players on camera. So I'd really like to keep an eye on that and maybe see some in the day 2 stages. Um, for me, I'm going to be ducking out for the rest of day 1. So Brad, you're going to be joined by Noah Walker for the last 3 rounds. But we're going to do it all over again tomorrow. So please, everyone, if you're having fun, we have a lot more Magic to bring you, and it's going to be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Reed.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. And I think Honorog has little hosting duties to do before we get to round 6.
Oh, yeah. Um,